Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I don't think I've covered this entirely on its own. I really want to. Now, the reason I go into so many different subjects is it's not to cover politics or anything to go with it. It's to have everybody understand how the world is working. It seems to me people are confused of the real story, and certainly nobody gets any truth. One of these things that everybody thinks they know about, one of those 100% things that you'd probably bet your life on because of the brainwashing, corrupt society that told you the facts in this matter, is the OJ Simpson case. And I happened to be living in Southern California at the time, and when that was broadcast with the Bronco following, because it really wasn't a chase, that's misinformation as well. He was going to the grave. If he would have tried to escape, that would have been a felony. But the bottom line is that I was even in that area at the time and saw different police cars going in that direction, unknown for why. So it's always interesting. And I'm always kind of around the action. But what is it all about? OJ Simpson, it's an open and shut case. He murdered his wife, or I guess his ex-wife at that time. And, of course, Ron Goldman. Complete and total lies. And they always have been. And it's kind of silly to think somebody could cut the throats of people, be in combat, and not have any amount of blood on himself or anywhere else. And, of course, not leave much at the scene. Now, here's the story that happened that makes 100% sense. I'm not going to go into it. You can find this on YouTube, and I may leave a link down below of his, I guess it was his manager or whatever, that put together this little story on him and what happened. And, of course, you've been told by, of course, who else? The corrupt police that, of course, don't do anything and want to make an open and shut case so it looks good on their record. If you talk to any cop, they'll tell you that. Well, I got to do all this stuff because that's how I get promoted. You know, like at Auschwitz, they had to cut the throats of babies and torture people and burn their eyes out, shrink their heads and other things that they did. That was their job. That's how they were graded. So what really happened was this. First of all, I'm probably going to put this in a short manner as I can. First of all, OJ was getting back together with his wife. They were reconciling. She and her family were always little party bitches, basically little sluts that went out and hunted out professional sports players and waggled their little bottoms so they could draw them in. This was a whole group of kind of middle-looking women. She certainly wasn't all that attractive, but she was attractive enough, and they hang out at these places, and they try and hook sports players because they have lots of money. She comes from a typical kind of terrible background. Her mother was German, from Germany, and really taught her daughters to be the sluts they are, because that's kind of the German way. So understanding that, that's what it started. But that's what she did, and she hooked OJ. And they had children together. I believe with her, I don't know if it's, the figures aren't important. I think there's 2 children involved that were fairly young at that time. So they had their problems. They had their scuffles. I think at one time he slapped her around a little bit, and there were pictures of that. But that wasn't really the full story, and that wasn't something that he did often. There was really no records of continual abuse in that area. But needless to say, that was a pretty terrible thing to do. So, and of course, he's a big, giant guy whose business is to be very physical and violent. That's what football is all about. And he was one of the greatest football players of all time. So that's obviously inexcusable, but that doesn't make him a murderer. If every person who slapped or hit their wife was a murderer, there would be nobody left on the planet. So this is an unfortunate, common, and inexcusable way generally, even though people can really push you to the point. So one of that is the fact that, so they were reconciling, they were getting back together, and all that was going on there. There were problems there. OJ wanted to get his wife on the straight and narrow. Why? She was a drug addict. She was hanging around with prostitutes and criminals, and there were drug addicts at her house constantly. And she had a whole book of these people. All of her girlfriends were little sluts. All of them owed lots of money to drug addicts, and they would pay it off with their sexual favors, etc. So all of this is what went on and has alleged to have been going on in this place. And she used to keep records of all the people that she had to call, particularly for drugs, in this book. And what he did, because they were reconciling, and there were children in the house while she's having criminals, drug addicts, owes money, and several people in that area, as has happened with people don't quite understand with the so-called Manson case, that was a lack of paying for drugs. It went overboard and went into this bizarre thing, but the bottom line is those people didn't pay for their drugs. Hollywood people are notorious for this. They think they can get away with it. You're playing a very dangerous game when you do that. But she was there partying with criminals and prostitutes, and all sorts of people were hanging out at her place. And obviously she had the eye for other people and brought someone in like Goldman, who, by the way, didn't even have a car, which is unheard of in Los Angeles. You can't get around in Los Angeles without a car, but apparently he was so poor and so stupid, or maybe he had a bad record, that he didn't even have a car. So OJ went over there to get this book and take it away from her. So that's what he was doing over there that night. What happened is that there was some, without going into details because it's a little bit complicated, what happened is that there was a criminal guy who has, by the way, confessed to the crime, that was working with, apparently, I don't know if it was with OJ or with her or whatever. He was some sort of criminal kind of guy, and he admitted to killing her. And this was part of a bizarre hit hooked up with, apparently, his attorney and quasi-friend Kardashian. So there's a mishmash of what happened. But this guy showed up and started to cause trouble. Goldman showed up, and there was then, and again, the way the frame of this, you have to listen to it, and I'm not going to listen to all this stuff over and over again to give a perfect sequence here, but it's the bigger picture that's important here. So things started to get nasty, apparently here, and OJ took off. Doesn't say much for him, but he wanted to get out of the situation because he could see that this was going to get really bad. So he went over there to get his wife straightened out, get her off of drugs, get the drugs away from his children. He was actually doing a heroic deed. And this mess happened, which other people, as I said, by the way, have actually confessed to doing. So he didn't get involved and use knives or anything else. He had a slight cut on his finger from a glass that he told the truth. He cut himself in Chicago, where he went that night. So he split out of there, and all of these things are a complete joke. There was really nothing found there that tracked him. Of course, the police showed up, messed up the entire scene, and then, of course, do like they always do, tried to frame him. It's interesting that there was very little blood drops anywhere, but there was going from his driveway up to his house that were planted there. They also found blood in his house that had actually coroner chemicals in it, meaning this was blood that was taken from OJ, put preservatives in, and then it was brought back to the scene to frame him. The glove was a frame. The glove was someplace, then it was at his house, and it really didn't fit him well, and that's correct. The shoe stuff was bogus. The shoes that were size that were found there was a 10 or 11, and he wears a 12. Well, you don't fit your feet into something that is an inch smaller. And these are, quote, Italian-type shoes, which are known to be even smaller than your average shoes. So this is all bogus. Nothing was ever found. Nothing really happened. They were actually getting together, and this turned into a momentous problem because she was a very low-life type of woman who was hanging around with a bunch of people. She had a drug addict. These are all been alleged and is online, and I certainly believe it. And I think, as I said, she, an entire family seems to have this kind of vulture type things. And things get even more complicated. Goldman's, the father's wife, was actually a secretary to a big criminal mafia people back east dealing in drugs. Well, that's got kind of strange things. And there's all sorts of these little connections that go on. So needless to say, this is a tragedy that happened that maybe could have been avoided, and why this person decided to go in there and do this and get rid of her. But she was considered a liability. It seems to be tied to his lawyer, Kardashian, who wanted to get rid of Nicole because she was a danger. She was a drug addict, and this could, in many ways, endanger OJ and his family, and he had young children, etc. So, I mean, that's the story. And that is the truth, and it makes 100% sense. The bottom line is that he wasn't covered anywhere. You can't cut people's throats with the blood that squirts out and not be covered with it and get it everywhere. People don't understand this. Secondly, throat cutting generally is something that a professional does, like the guy who killed both of these people. You generally don't do that. If you're angry at somebody, you multiply stab them. That's an anger thing. So you would stab them, not cut their throat. That's an execution type killing, also called the Colombian necktie, where you cut their throat and pull their tongue down. These are the type of things. And by the way, there was a couple of those instances in that neighborhood as well at that particular time. Now, we don't know what's going on in those areas. But as usual, they pick a target of somebody who they want to railroad, and that's exactly what happened with him. Now, OJ may not be the nicest guy. He's kind of obnoxious. I don't really like him very much as a personality because I don't know him personally. So he's not very sympathetic, and he is pretty aggressive because, of course, that's what he did. Secondly, because of his problems, he does have horrible knees that can't move very well either. This is a common problem with older people, and particularly with athletes, so it's highly unlikely that he could have moved all that well. And certainly, it's highly unlikely that he could have killed two people easily without having all sorts of problems and injuries and bruises. You punch somebody, you're going to have bruised hands and stuff. He doesn't have any of that. If you cut someone's throat, you're going to have blood everywhere. There wasn't blood everywhere. The so-called evidence there, which was overlooked, was just that. There was even many things. There was even a handprint I heard from one of the investigators there. Furman said there was a giant handprint found somewhere. That was overlooked. Everything was overlooked. So this is very particular, very typical police work. And then what they do is they contrive everything to get someone convicted. So the bottom line is that he had nothing to do with this directly. He had to indirectly to do with it. And apparently the actual murderer is connected to him and Kardashian in some fashion. And I forget the exact details of that. So this guy was there and did this deed because it was hooked up with Simpson and Kardashian, not to kill anybody, at least not from OJ's point of view. But this guy was some sort of, bodyguard, protector, watching people. I don't quite understand that particular position. I'd have to go back to listen to that, and I will have a link down below. But this is the typical problems that we run into where we're told a bunch of lying facts and everybody was 100% convinced, including, bogus bad investigators like Maury Terry, who said that he was guilty as well. I mean, that's the kind of terrible investigators that we have. Experts come out of the woodwork to condemn people when they don't know the facts. And it doesn't make any sense for him to particularly do that. Now, as I said, slapping your wife or girlfriend around certainly does not make you a murderer. And it was not something that was continually done, even though there is no proof of that this was kind of a one-time incident, while generally people that abuse like that are repeat offenders. But generally, this doesn't seem to be the case. And they were getting back together again. This was the move to get them back together again, to get her clean, to get these bad people out of her condominium with her children who are sleeping upstairs. I mean, this is horrific. He was trying to fix this. Unfortunately, everything went wrong. But the bottom line, he didn't do that. He had constant frames on him, from blood to gloves to these bogus footprints. All the things that are involved in this make no sense whatsoever. So, but you and almost everybody, and I've said from day one, being a gnosis thinker, because I immediately said he was innocent. That's what you do with gnosis. And I didn't ever believe that OJ did it. It didn't figure. It's not what people do. And generally, the brutality of a crime like this, which is done in a professional execution manner, doesn't fit with an enraged person who wants to stab somebody numerous times to take out their hatred. You don't cut people's throats unless it's a professional job. Everything else didn't make sense. And few people understand that this wasn't an argument with his ex-wife. He went over there reconciling, trying to clean up her messed up, terrible life. And, this is a time when everybody was stoned out again. I mean, we go through periods like the 60s. Everybody was on LSD. Everybody was stoned. Everybody was humping. Then we go into this particular time period, which is, I'm not sure for how long, but maybe 5 to 15 years, where everybody was doped up on cocaine. There's buckets full of it. You would go to Hollywood parties and they would have buckets of cocaine there, literally buckets, bowls full of pills. This is what they did, and they have lots of money to do it. And there's plenty of people to supply them, and you, of course, can go down in Mexico and buy a lot of this as well. So it's all very convenient. Now, nobody understood this. The plain and simple fact is that this is what happens when people are not seeking truth, but this is how society is. The society wants to hang something. Someone wants to get a feather in their cap no matter who they hurt. And we all know the kind of problems that we have with police departments, which are basically, I don't know how we can call them police departments. Unfortunately, the good cops don't seem to do anything. But this is criminal activity at its highest level. I mean, it's just not, it's not too difficult to see what's going on. And this is what happens. And it happens not only to the guys on the street where they plant drugs on and they make sure they get these convictions and they get a bunch of street people and frame them. And then, of course, look at that record. Well, you arrested last month 25 people on drug charges. Yeah, with none of them valid. We know the fact that the FBI, there are cases of this, of where they actually murdered people. They also have been involved in the fixing of hundreds of DNA cases where they fix the DNA. I mean, this is pretty shocking, but this is how the world is. That's why I talk about things like this, so people understand what's going on. You have to understand how the world works. Who are you going to trust? What is involved? What are your power structures? Because if you don't, you're going to have serious, serious problems. And here's even a very wealthy guy that they went after, because we have this elite group of people that want to destroy you and are basically criminals. They get something out of it. This doesn't happen because people have good intentions and are confused. This happens because these kind of bad cops work with criminals and they don't really care. And if they can get a feather in their hat of this kind of a case, that's what they do. It's really sad, and we need to understand this and change it. This is all about changing corruption, the corruption that is in our governments, in our police departments, in our militaries, in our hospitals. This has to change. There are doctors and hospitals that are charging hundreds of millions of dollars to Medi-Cal, or at least 50, hundreds, 200, whatever it is, to Medi-Cal for false billings, that they put all this money in their pockets. I mean, this is evil to the highest level. People can't get the services they need because of fraudulent hospitals who are bunking our money. This is money that the government is paying, whether it's state or federal. So until all this stops, nothing else is going to work out. Of course, you have to empower your own life. You have to make sure that you have that edge, that you are able to get by well, that you're able to produce what you need to produce to make your life better. But ultimately, the world is never, ever going to change. There's nothing new about this. We've had corruption all over the world since there's been more than 3 people. General Custer talks about the horrible corruption in the Grant administration. He writes about this in his books. So, and it goes on and on. In the 1920s in Los Angeles, going back to the same place, there was huge amounts of corruption, and LA is known for that. The Hat Squad, who killed organized crime, not to eliminate them in a vigilante well, but to take over the business so they could put the money in their pocket. The chief of police in Los Angeles helped criminals or land developers turn off the water to the farms so that they could steal their land. That's what Chinatown was about. They had this whole and there's a movie on the Hat Squad of the people who killed the mafia. Chinatown was a movie made about the corruption of the land taking. So it goes on and on and on, and this happens all over the country and the world. So if we're going to change anything, we must have strong anti-corruption bureaus, investigators, and we have to somehow make sure the anti-corruption people don't get corrupt. But nothing's going to change into that. And you can't believe anything you hear again. So, and that's really the capsule of this particular lecture here, is that you can't believe anything. Everybody was 100% convinced. And I'm sure that most people, even today, are not going to believe this story. That they think that you can go out and cut people's throats and get into fights and you don't have bruised knuckles and you don't get any blood anywhere. All this. They found no blood in OJ Simpson's pipes in his house. They checked all that. There were no clothing. There were no nothing. So the point is that this is the same old story. So you cannot trust anyone, and you cannot believe what you hear. That's why I always love to hear about certain events that happen. I mean, I remember that and I've talked about this before, in the Boston bombing. First of all, 30 people were killed. Others were injured. When it came out 3 or 4 days later, I believe there was 1 person killed and 2 people injured. But this is the type of thing that happens. So the information that you get, particularly instantly, and generally when the story's over, you never get a follow-up story. So you never really hear what happens to someone. None of that is told correctly. So these are all the types of things that you run into that you have problems with in terms of getting false information. This is a type of disinformation, and your news media and your reporters are nothing more than bumbling idiots. You know, there's been some ridiculous thought that these are in some way dedicated people trying to bring truth to you, you know. As with the Watergate thing, investigative reporters. It's nonsense. They're low-paid people that are fed stories and produce what they're told to do. And unfortunately, that's how the world is. So hopefully that's cleared up and you can look at the world in a proper way. Start thinking properly. Start thinking in a gnosis fashion, that you reverse everything, that you don't believe anything. All history is a fantasy. It's just another case of contrived disinformation, and you get that from everyone. Researchers think they're getting information from correct people when they're fed disinformation that they then pass on to you as facts. And it goes on and on. So no matter what I look at, I run into the same problem. We got people investigating very specific situations, as it happened with the son of Sam and Moritari, who know nothing about occultism whatsoever. How can you investigate a so-called case that involves occultism when you have no background whatsoever? This is the same thing with all reporting. The reporters know nothing. They're journalism students that basically have been pushed in there. They're low-paid garbage jobs, and that's how all the media is. What does that mean? It means they're paid off easily, and I know this from personal experiences, which someday I will talk about. But again, I know they're bought off, they're all bought off, and that's very easy to do. They don't make much money. Maybe a news reporter or a commentator that you see on the nightly news in your area, depending if it's a large town or not, may be paid a fair amount of money, but they're not technically reporters. They're talking heads, they're commentators, or they're just reading papers off there. The people that go out and get the stories and everything else, whether it's newspaper, print, or anything else, are low-paid people that are bought off, told what to say, etc. We saw this with their lack of reporting with the ACT UP people. Here people are camping out all over the world, and they ignore them. They also ignore a whole bunch of stories. Because ultimately, it's not what you report. I mean, it's not what you say. It's what you choose to report. So if you choose to only report this information, that's all anybody knows about, and you overlook the other. So you're making choices, or choices are made for you. And this is the whole garbage flow of disinformation that comes out there. Remember, there's answers to everything. There's not a single problem this society has that has not already been solved, but everyone is refusing to implement what it takes to solve that problem, even though it's sitting right in front of them. That's how evil this society is. So hopefully this has been helpful. Till next time.